Hi, welcome to the Tuesday Forum. This is Jim Peters with the Responsible Hospitality Institute. This is a summary of the Tuesday Forum held on March 14th, 2023, on the future of music and music venues. The Tuesday Forum is a monthly event which has an open format where everybody is an expert. For this particular session, we had representatives from throughout North America focusing in on these three topics. How are music venues in your city recovering? What are the challenges and what support are they receiving? What follows is the report from the small group discussion groups that were held so that you can get an insight on some of the trends and some of the challenges and what music venues need for the future. Thank you for your participation, and I hope you join us again in a future forum.
On the national scale of what of challenges we're seeing in venues overall is obviously follow from COVID. The biggest one being a lot of artists, a lot of shows being canceled last minute due to sickness that aren't necessarily COVID related, especially because overall awareness of health and well-being is way more pertinent than it was a few years ago. So just more shows being canceled last minute because the lead singer is sick. And that leads out to a whole night of potential revenue for a venue and even local businesses in the area being canceled, tied to just one thing. So what we talked about are venues doing alternative revenue streams, such as hosting different types of like dance nights or even certain community events. An example I brought up was the one off the top of my head was a venue I heard of did like a pumpkin carving thing in the middle of the day around Halloween one of these years. So just kind of opening their doors to more aspects of the community. Another challenge we talked about for venues on national scale is kind of like the general awareness of going to the smaller spaces, the smaller indie venues, not the Live Nation and AEG venues. And just kind of choosing between, do I go see an artist I really like and spend a lot of money on a ticket, or do I go check out a show at the venue around the corner from me? That was a big challenge we talked about. Again, the general awareness for fans to get to that, to go to their local venue, support their areas.
I'm Leo. I'm a senior at University of Colorado Denver, studying music business. And my perspective comes more from the live music consumer side and kind of dissecting how they make their decisions for which venues to go to. We talked about whether or not the consumer is picking the music event to go to because of the artist or because of the venue. And I think a lot of consumers are picking the music events they go to because of the artist, regardless of the venue and kind of regardless of the ticket pricing. Consumers have a lot of access to live music events, but they still are forced to pick and choose which venues they go to because of ticket pricing. I guess students in my experience are reluctant to go to a show like every week. But if I believe if they were more aware about independent venues, and they'd be more willing to do something like that and be more regular about going to music events.
We had Rachel from Raleigh who shared a little bit about how their nightlife is working. And I found like one of the most interesting things she shared is when they have like festivals like Dreamville, but specifically Hopscotch. I think they will reach out to independent local music venues and like do pre-shows there to like stimulate those music venues before the festival, which is super cool. And it's really nice to help out those independent venues. And so we talked a little bit about oversaturation and how that has created issues as a musician getting venues. Sam shared that he's had hard times getting venues, and I've been like dropped from like discussions mid discussion because they gave my date away to someone else, which is super unfortunate. But that's stuff like AEG and Live Nation has started doing because it's so competitive right now, and like how to mitigate that. We talked a lot about staffing and how like that's a huge problem, specifically security, and how like regardless of contract or off-duty police officers, it's super hard to get enough numbers to run a show at max capacity safely, which is unfortunate, and like how we've worked around that. We talked a little bit about infrastructure issues. Specifically, the Ogden Theater in Colorado has had a lot of issues with power and making sure that they can run their shows, because shows take up a lot of kilowatt hours. Like they just suck power. And because of like the issues with power on Colfax, the Ogden has a hard time running shows. And there have been a couple times where I've been at a show and the power just goes out, which is unfortunate for sure. And yeah, we talked about like how live music has been moved outside because of COVID and how that's really stimulated the environment, but also how the difficulties working with residences and people who aren't a fan of music at all hours and how to work with them. Yeah, all very interesting stuff. It was very cool to hear from.
We started off talking about the struggles that we have noticed, and one of the biggest things we noticed is that like stadium shows and big artists are selling out, and there's huge attendance pretty much everywhere across the country from our limited perspectives. But the smaller venues are not selling nearly as many tickets, and smaller acts are not, despite being more affordable than those large tickets. We also spoke about how in like certain cities like Denver and like the big cities like LA, New York, places like that, affordability makes it very difficult for younger students who are kind of the target demographic of these shows to actually be able to attend them. And along the line of affordability, we also talked about how ticket prices themselves are not actually that much higher. It's just that you're paying for the comfort of a nicer venue and for an artist's brand. Essentially, you're paying to see that person. We also talked about how some iconic venues are facing threat because of like land zoning issues, renting costs, whether they rent or own that property, you know, is a different factor for whether or not they could end up losing that space. And we also talked about AEG and Live Nation and how those bigger promoters fighting is kind of hurting the indies and the audiences more than anybody else. And then as far as solutions and things like that, we talked a lot about bills that were passed or aid that was given out. We talked about NEVA providing funding regardless of tax status. We talked about the American Rescue Plan Act. We talked about arts with a capital A versus just arts, the little guys versus the big guys, and how NEVA was very key in helping the little guys who couldn't quite secure things like ARPA funding.
I am Storm Glore, the music studies professor at University of Colorado, Denver. And to Dana's point, Sean Watterson was in our call, and coincidentally, he had to leave because he is meeting with someone to try to get more funding as we speak. So we do want to recognize what he's done with NEVA as well. And Dana, you have been such a great leader. Anyway, we talked a lot about Cleveland and Denver in our conversation, and not to repeat anything that's already been brought up, but Sean, brought up several points about the struggles in Cleveland with the economy affecting, whether people go to shows or not, and actual demographic shifts in the city that have affected consumers who live on the outer parts of the city coming downtown and coming to the heart of the city, to these venues, which has been a real challenge for them in Cleveland. But one thing Sean brought up, when considering what we're doing here in Denver, that venues rely so much on sales of alcohol. And as consumers don't show up when they've purchased a ticket, or don't show up in general, or drink less, both of those factors are hugely impactful to the bottom line at venues. And the contrast here is that we have legal marijuana here in Denver, and the question was brought up, how might that be affecting our consumers buying less alcohol at shows because they've got marijuana. So I thought that was interesting that he brought that up as something that's affecting what's going on in venues. Is just the decrease in alcohol consumption, which they rely on heavily. And I think certainly students, you can chime in if there's anything I forgot, but I think that's a quick summary of what we discussed.
Hi, This is Jim Peters again. I want to thank you for participating in this video presentation. Please go to our website, sociablecity.org, to learn more about the different programs and upcoming events that we have. Thanks again. Bye.